Winter arrived without asking permission. It came on a night when the wind learned how to speak in knives, and the snow fell so thick it seemed the sky had grown tired of carrying its own grief. By dawn, the world was reduced to white silence and the sound of breath leaving bodies like confession. In places like this, stories did not begin with love. They began with endurance, with shame carried quietly, with people learning which souls could be overlooked without consequence. Long before anyone spoke the Alpha King's name, the girl already knew what it meant to be invisible. She lived at the far edge of the village, where the road thinned into ruts and the houses leaned away from one another as if unwilling to share warmth. Her coat was too light for the season, it seems repaired so many times they no longer pretended to be whole. When she walked through the square, voices softened, not out of kindness, but to sharpen their gossip. She was the girl with nothing to offer, nothing to claim, nothing to defend her but a stubborn posture that refused to bend entirely. Winter made no allowances for dignity, yet she carried hers like a hidden ember. That morning, the baker's wife looked through her instead of at her. The butcher pretended not to hear her request. Coins passed from gloved hands to fuller palms, while the girls stayed empty and red. Someone laughed, a thin sound that cracked in the cold. Another voice muttered that mercy was wasted on those who brought nothing back in return. She did not answer. She had learned that silence, too, could be a form of survival. Still, the words followed her as she turned away, sinking into her shoulders like fresh snow. Beyond the last houses, the land opened into fields locked under ice. The wind ran unhindered there, sweeping over drifts and cutting skin until it burned. She crossed that ground because there was nowhere else to go. Each step was a negotiation with pain, her boots soaked, her toes numb enough to feel borrowed. She told herself she would walk until the shame thinned, until the village noise faded from her ears. Instead, something else broke the stillness, a sound so small it might have been imagined, if not for the way it tugged at her chest. At first, she thought it was the wind again, trapped between snowbanks. Then she heard it, a whimper, uneven and weak, rising and falling like a heartbeat losing confidence. She stopped. The cold rushed in to punish hesitation, but she followed the sound, brushing aside snow with hands already raw. There, half buried against a fallen fence, lay a pup no bigger than her forearm, its dark fur matted with ice and blood. One leg lay wrong, bent in a way that spoke of pain endured too long. Its eyes opened when she knelt, startlingly bright, fixed on her with an awareness that did not belong to a mere animal. She should have stepped back. Everyone knew the stories, creatures that wore innocence as a disguise, beasts that marked those foolish enough to touch them. Winter was no season for risks. Yet the pup shivered, its breath coming in thin bursts, and something ancient in her answered. She saw herself reflected there, broken, cold, unwanted, still breathing. Carefully, she slid off her coat and wrapped it around the small, trembling body. The pup did not snarl. It did not flee. It pressed closer, trusting her warmth as if it had been waiting for her all along. The journey back was slow and painful. She cradled the pup against her chest, shielding it from the wind with her body, counting steps instead of time. By the time she reached her room, a narrow space with a single window and a hearth that rarely held fire, her arms ached, and her vision swam. She laid the pup near the embers, coaxing heat from the last of her kindling. The smell of iron filled the air as she cleaned the wound, her hand steady despite the tremor in her bones. The pup watched her, silent now, eyes reflecting flame. Night settled thick and close. Outside, the wind circled the walls as if searching for a way in. She tore bread into pieces small enough to share, ignoring her own hunger. When the pup ate, strength returning in careful increments, relief loosened something inside her chest. She spoke to it then, not words of ownership or hope, but quiet reassurances, the kind one offers without expectation of being believed. At some point, exhaustion took her, and she slept on the floor beside the hearth, one hand resting on the warm rise and fall of the pup's side. She woke before dawn to an absence. The space beside the fire was empty, the embers cold. Panic surged, sharp and unreasonable. Then she saw it, lying where the pup had been, a small, dark mark pressed into the ash, shaped like a clawed crescent, unmistakably deliberate. Outside, the snow was untouched, no tracks leading away. The wind carried a distant sound then, not a whimper, but a low call, answering another far beyond hearing. The girl closed her fingers around the mark, warmth blooming where none should have been, and for the first time, she understood that mercy, once given, rarely returned alone. Snow did not retreat after that night, it tightened its hold, sealing the village in a quiet that felt watched. The girl carried the dark mark in her pocket like a secret that warmed her fingers, though she could not say why. Each morning she expected it to fade, to prove itself a trick of ash and fatigue, yet it remained, smooth and deliberate, its curve fitting her palm as if shaped for it. She returned to the square with lowered eyes and steadied breath, hoping routine would blunt the unease stirring beneath her ribs. Routine did not forgive. The baker's wife noticed the absence first, a narrowing of eyes, a question sharpened by cold. Whispers slid from mouth to mouth with the ease of wind over drifts. Someone said they heard howling before dawn. Someone else said the girl had always been strange, too quiet, too willing to wander where sensible folk did not. The butcher set his cleaver down with care and asked where she had been the night before, as if answers were owed him. She replied with courtesy and little else, knowing how quickly truth could be dressed as guilt. By midday the square had learned a new posture, bodies angled toward her with interest that felt like hunger. Snowflakes clung to lashes as people leaned closer, eager for a story. She felt again the old shame, familiar as a bruise, but it did not land the same way. There was a steadiness in her now, a memory of warmth against her chest, of eyes that had trusted her. She held that memory like a shield and finished her errands without apology. Still, when a child cried at the sight of her, she flinched. Beyond the village, the land answered a different call. The forests along the ridge stirred, branches shedding snow as if shrugging off a long sleep. In a hollow beneath the pines, a great shape moved, black fur dusted white, breath fogging the air with controlled force. The Alpha King listened to the report without interrupting, his gaze fixed on the trail pressed into ice by hurried feet. His son lay nearby, bandaged with care that smelled of smoke and salt, the wound already knitting under a power older than crowns. The king's jaw tightened, not with rage, but with recognition. Mercy had been given where none was owed. He ordered the pack to readiness with a gesture. Wolves rose as one, silent, their eyes reflecting the pale day. They did not celebrate the heir's survival. They marked the debt. Snow accepted their passage, folding over tracks as if sworn to secrecy. When they moved, the forest leaned aside. Back in the village, the girl discovered that debt could echo. At her door lay a loaf wrapped in cloth finer than any she owned. No mark, no name. She hesitated, then brought it inside, hands trembling not from hunger but from the sense of being seen. Later, a fur cloak appeared where she had left none, dark and heavy, smelling faintly of pine and cold. The gifts unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. Kindness, when unexplained, demanded courage. The whispers sharpened. A woman crossed herself as the girl passed. A man spat into the snow and said beasts did not bring blessings. By evening, the village elders had agreed to watch. Lanterns were lit early, their glow jittery against windows. The girl felt the weight of attention follow her to the edge of the square, where she paused and looked back. Faces turned away too late. She understood then that mercy had made her visible in a way poverty never had. Night came down like a held breath. The wind shifted, carrying a sound that did not belong to weather. It rolled low and measured, threading between houses, settling in chests. Dogs went silent. Horses stamped and pulled at their ties. The girl stepped outside, the dark mark warm as a pulse in her pocket, and lifted her face to the cold. She felt it before she saw it, a pressure in the air, a gathering intention. They emerged at the village boundary without spectacle. One moment there was snow and fence and the thin line of the road, the next, there were wolves, filling the space as if poured into it. Their fur drank the lantern light. At their center walked a man cloaked in black, his presence bending the night around him. He did not look at the villagers first. He looked at her. Fear rippled through the square, then stilled, as if corrected. The Alpha King raised a hand and the pack halted, obedience absolute. He spoke, and his voice carried without effort, calm as deep water. He asked who had sheltered his son. The question fell like a stone into silence. Eyes turned to the girl, some accusing, some pleading, all relieved it was not them. She stepped forward because there was nowhere else to stand. She did not kneel. She bowed her head, the way she had learned to do when dignity and survival met. The king studied her, not as a curiosity, but as a fact. Snow settled on his shoulders and did not melt. He took a step closer, then another, until the space between them held only breath. He saw the rawness of her hands, the thinness of her coat, the steadiness that had not been taught by kindness. Something unreadable crossed his face. The villagers began to speak at once, words tumbling over one another, accusations and explanations, tangled together. The king listened for a heartbeat, then cut the noise with a glance. He turned back to the girl and asked how she had found the pup. She told him simply. Where there were chances to embellish, she did not. Where there were reasons to defend herself, she did not reach for them. Truth stood without decoration. He nodded once. The pack shifted, a sound like wind through needles. The king extended his hand, and in it lay a small crescent of dark metal, shaped like the mark she carried, its surface etched with lines that caught the light. A token, he said, for mercy rendered in winter. Gasps fluttered through the square. He placed it in her palm with care that felt ceremonial, then turned to the elders and spoke of debts and laws older than their houses. When he left, the wolves flowed after him, the night closing behind them as if they had never been. The square remained, stunned, lanterns flickering, snow falling as it always had. The girl stood alone with the weight of the token in her hand, aware that nothing had been resolved, only set in motion. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a low call answered another, and she knew the story had learned her name. Sleep did not come easily after that. The girl lay awake counting the small sounds of her room, the pop of cooling embers, the creak of wood tightening under frost. The token rested on her chest, its weight an anchor and a warning. She thought of the king's eyes, the way they had held no heat and no cruelty, only judgment shaped by distance. In the gray before morning, she rose and pressed her forehead to the glass, watching snow blur the world into soft edges. She wondered how mercy could travel so far, and what it might demand in return. By daylight the village had found its voice again, louder for having lost it. Doors opened and closed with emphasis. Conversation stopped when she approached, then resumed with a new sharpness when she passed. The elders summoned her to the hall, a low building whose stones remembered older winters. They asked for the token. She refused without raising her voice. She said it had been given to her, not to them. The refusal changed something. It made her dangerous. They spoke of balance and order, of keeping peace with powers that passed through like storms. She listened, then reminded them that peace had not kept her warm, nor fed her, nor saved the pup bleeding into the snow. The elders exchanged looks heavy with calculation. When they dismissed her, it was with a promise of watchfulness that felt like threat. Outside, a child ran past her, laughing, then stopped short, eyes wide, and fled. The girl felt the old hurt and let it pass through her without lodging. She had learned the difference between wounds that demanded tending and those that healed by being ignored. She walked to the edge of the fields and stood where the land fell away, breathing until the cold found her lungs. The token warmed again, as if answering her pulse. In the forest, the Alpha King stood with his son, the pup's form already lengthening, bones shifting beneath fur as power asserted itself. He placed his hand on the young one's head and felt the echo of pain fade. He spoke of debts not as chains but as roads, of choice as the truest measure of rule. The son listened, eyes bright, and looked back toward the village with a curiosity that bordered on reverence. The pack ranged wider that day, unseen but present, a perimeter drawn by intent. A hunter's arrow missed its mark and shattered against a tree. A trap lay sprung and empty. Signs accumulated like frost. The village felt watched again, not by rumor, but by consequence. At dusk, the girl found another gift at her door, this one smaller, quieter, a bundle of dried herbs wrapped with twine, chosen with knowledge of healing. She understood then that the king had not come to end a story but to open it. As she lifted the bundle, the sound came back, low and measured, threading the air. She closed her fingers around the token and stepped into the snow, knowing that whatever waited beyond the ridge had already decided she mattered. She paused at the boundary where the road thinned, feeling the village behind her and the forest ahead claim equal pull. Snow hissed as it touched her lashes. She did not know what would be asked of her next, only that the asking would be done in silence and watched by many eyes. Somewhere, a voice she had not yet learned to answer weighed her worth against law and blood. The wind shifted again, carrying a promise sharpened by winter. She lifted her chin, steadied her breath, and took one step forward, the token warming as if in approval, as if the snow itself had chosen a witness and would not look away. Night listened, and the forest answered with a patience that felt like destiny drawing closer. Despite her fragile courage, the forest accepted her without comment. Snow muted her footsteps, and the trees stood in dark attendance, their branches stitched with white like old scars remembered kindly. She had followed no road, only the pull of the token warming against her skin, a quiet insistence that felt less like command and more like invitation. When the wind shifted, it carried a scent of pine and iron, and she knew she was no longer alone. The Alpha King waited where the trees thinned into a small clearing, firelight breaking the blue of dusk. He stood apart from the pack, tall and still, his cloak heavy with frost. Wolves ringed the space at a respectful distance, their presence a held breath rather than a threat. She stopped at the edge, uncertain whether to step forward or remain, and he noticed the hesitation before it settled into fear. He raised one hand, palm open, not as a ruler demanding approach, but as a man granting permission. She crossed the last few steps slowly. The cold bit through her boots, yet her attention fixed on his face, the way shadow and flame traced the planes of it. His eyes held the same calm she remembered from the square, but here it carried weight, sharpened by solitude. He spoke her name once, carefully, as if testing its balance. Hearing it in his voice shifted something inside her, a small fracture opening into light. He asked her to sit, and she did, lowering herself onto a fallen log near the fire. The wolves did not move. The silence around them felt deliberate, curated. He remained standing at first, gaze angled toward the trees, as if the forest itself were listening. When he turned back to her, he asked her to tell the story again, not for proof but for understanding. She felt the old instinct to shrink, to soften details so they would not offend, and resisted it. She spoke plainly of the field, the blood on the snow, the choice made without thought of reward. As she spoke, he knelt to feed the fire, his movements economical, respectful of the ritual. He did not interrupt. When she finished, the words hung between them, fragile as glass. He stood again and said that mercy given in winter was a rare currency, one that bound giver and receiver alike. He said debts could be paid in gold or blood, but this one would require something harder. He did not yet name it. She asked then why he had come himself. The question surprised them both. He considered it, the fire reflecting in his eyes, and answered that a king could not send another to account for what touched his heir. He spoke of his son's wound, of the care that had saved him, and of the mark left behind as a promise, not a brand. He said that the village feared what it did not understand, and fear, left untended, grew claws. Her hands tightened in her lap. She told him she did not want trouble, that she had lived quietly and could do so again. The admission cost her, and he saw it. He said that quiet lives were often the bravest, but that the world rarely allowed them to remain untouched. He asked what she wanted. The question unsettled her more than accusation ever had. Wanting had never been safe. She thought of warmth shared without expectation, of eyes that had trusted her in the snow. She said she wanted to be left in peace. He nodded, acknowledging the honesty, then said peace was not a place but a condition, one that required protection when threatened. He offered her that protection without flourish, stating it as fact. The wolves shifted, a low sound rippling the clearing like wind through grass. She hesitated, then asked what such protection would cost. He met her gaze squarely and said it would cost her courage. He did not explain further. Instead, he removed his cloak and draped it over her shoulders, the weight of it anchoring her against the cold. The gesture was intimate in its restraint, and she felt her breath catch. He stepped back at once, honoring the boundary he had crossed. The fire burned lower. He spoke then of the village elder's request for the token and of his refusal to intervene directly. He said choices revealed themselves best under pressure. He watched her face as he said it, measuring resolve not in words but in posture. She realized he was not testing her worth, but her willingness to claim it. A howl rose in the distance, answered by another, not urgent, but alert. He turned his head toward the sound and said the pack would hold the forest line through the night. He asked her to stay until morning, not as a captive, but as a guest. The distinction mattered. She agreed, feeling the forest close in around them, protective rather than oppressive. When sleep finally claimed her, it came beside the fire, the cloak pulled close, the wolf's presence a steady rhythm at the edge of consciousness. She dreamed of snow melting into clear water, of hands unafraid. At dawn, she woke to the king standing over her, the light soft on his face. He said her name again and told her the village would be summoned at midday. He did not say why, only that what was begun in winter would soon be named aloud. As he turned away, she felt the token warm sharply against her heart, and understood that peace, once offered, was never simple, and never free. Iron bells rang at noon, not in celebration but in warning, their sound rolling across snowbound roofs like judgment. People gathered because bells demanded obedience, not belief. The girl stood among them wrapped in the Alpha King's cloak, its dark weight marking her more loudly than accusation ever had. Eyes cut toward her, then away, fearful of what looking too long might invite. Frost-glazed lashes, breath steamed, and the square felt smaller than it ever had. At its center, space waited, empty, as if the ground itself anticipated truth arriving with measured steps. Silence pressed harder than winter could. They came soon after, without haste, without spectacle, yet every heart recognized the shift. The Alpha King entered the square as one might enter a court of law, calm, inevitable, followed by his pack arranged in disciplined arcs. Wolves lined the boundaries, neither snarling nor bowing, simply present. He did not raise his voice when he spoke, yet the bells seemed to lean closer. He named the girl, named her act, named the debt owed. Each word landed cleanly, stripping rumor from bone, leaving only fact. No one dared interrupt the authority standing before them in that frozen hour together. Murmurs rose, then died, smothered by the king's lifted hand. He spoke of winter laws older than the village stones, of mercy that bound stronger than fear. The elders shifted, calculating, their powers suddenly light as ash. The girl felt the weight of every gaze, yet she stood unmoving, spine straight beneath borrowed fur. When the king turned toward her, his expression softened only slightly, enough to signal intention without surrender. He asked her to step forward, and this time, she did so without flinching. Courage moved quietly through her, steady as thawing ground beneath relentless seasonal ice and scrutiny. He removed a silver-marked chain from his coat and held it aloft, letting light strike its curve. A collective breath caught as he declared her under pack protection, untouchable by blade or decree. Gasps fractured the square, disbelief breaking into fear. Protection was not gift but proclamation, and everyone understood the cost of defiance. The girl's hands trembled when the chain was placed against her palm, not from awe, but from the irreversible narrowing of her path. Behind the king, wolves lowered their heads, sealing the vow. Snow fell thicker, as if recording history in silence for generations yet unborn. The villagers' anger did not vanish, it transformed, shrinking into whispers edged with obedience. The elders bowed, their mouths tight, calculating futures rewritten without consent. The king addressed them briefly, promising consequence for any harm done, his tone devoid of threat because threat was unnecessary. He then turned away, signaling dismissal, yet paused long enough to meet the girl's eyes again. In that glance lay recognition, respect, and something unspoken that unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. As the pack withdrew, the square exhaled, changed beyond recall. Winter seemed to lean closer, listening as fate redrafted itself quietly there. The girl returned home beneath watchful stares, chain hidden beneath her dress, its cool presence heavy against her skin. Neighbors closed doors gently, as if sudden movements might invite wolves back. Inside her room, she removed the Alpha King's cloak with care, folding it despite shaking hands. She had been granted safety, yet safety felt like standing on a narrow bridge over unseen depth. She pressed her forehead to the wall, breathing through the swell of change. Outside, a single howl rose, distant but deliberate, a reminder that protection also meant belonging to someone else's law, whether welcomed or feared. Night deepened, carrying with it restless thoughts she could not quiet. She replayed the king's voice, measured and final, and wondered how mercy had elevated her into danger. Power had brushed past her like winter lightning, illuminating flaws and strengths alike. She feared resentment more than hunger now. When sleep came, it was shallow, filled with images of snow breaking beneath her feet. Near dawn, warmth bloomed from the chain again, pulsing once, as if answering a call she could not hear. She woke knowing something had shifted beyond the village, and she stood at its center unprepared, exposed, resolute. In the forest, the Alpha King stood beneath bare branches, considering the risk he had taken. By naming her protected, he had named her significant, and significance drew conflict like blood drew wolves. His advisors questioned quietly, but he silenced them with a glance. Mercy chosen freely carried authority no crown could command. He thought of her steady voice, her refusal to plead, and recognized a strength unshaped by power. Such strength unsettled old orders. He sent messengers along the ridges, instructing vigilance. Winter was not finished testing what had been set in motion, and neither was he nor fate. By midday, news traveled faster than feet. Traders altered routes, hunters delayed excursions, and mothers pulled children close. The girl sensed the tightening net without seeing it, feeling tension ripple outward from her name. Protection invited challenge, resentment sharpened ambition. She walked the familiar paths with new awareness, noting how shadows lingered longer. At the well, a woman stared openly, fear battling envy. The girl met the gaze and did not look away. It was a small rebellion, but it felt like claiming ground beneath her feet, however fragile that ground remained despite Winter's constant pressure and watchfulness around her. That evening, the elders convened again without summoning her, a choice that spoke louder than bells. Decisions were made behind stone walls, plans shaped by fear of what the Alpha King's favor implied. The girl felt excluded and exposed simultaneously, a dangerous balance. She prepared a meager meal and ate slowly, listening to the wind scrape shutters. When darkness settled, she wrapped herself in the king's cloak once more, seeking warmth but finding resolve instead. If winter demanded proof of worth, she would endure it standing, not shrinking, whatever cost tomorrow revealed under watchful skies and gathering consequences yet unnamed. Sleep returned late, heavy with anticipation. Dreams carried her through snowbound corridors where voices echoed without faces. She woke before dawn again, heart steady despite uncertainty. Outside, tracks appeared near her door, large and deliberate, pressed deep into fresh snow. Wolves had come close, not to threaten, but to mark presence. She knelt and touched one print, feeling its edges soften beneath her fingers. Protection was not distant now, it lingered within reach, patient and observant. She rose understanding that visibility could no longer be avoided, only met with honesty and courage as winter sharpened every watching eye around her. When the sun crested pale hills, horns sounded from the forest, low and deliberate. The call carried authority, summoning not fear but attention. The girl stood in her doorway, cloak clasped, chain warm, heart quiet. She knew the village would be called to witness again, that silence would be broken by names and choices. Whatever the Alpha King intended to declare next would bind more than law, it would shape belonging itself. Snow fell softly as if to soften what was coming. She stepped forward, ready to be seen, knowing winter had not yet finished asking its price from her. Dawn broke thin and pale, as if the sun itself hesitated to witness what winter had carried to its edge. The village gathered without bells this time, drawn by the low authority of horns echoing from the forest. Snow hushed their steps, and fear sharpened their listening. The girl stood at the front, cloak clasped, chain warm against her skin. She felt no urge to hide. Whatever waited beyond the line of trees had already crossed into her life, and retreat would only betray the mercy that had carried her this far through cold, hunger, and scorn. The Alpha King entered alone. The pack remained at the forest's mouth, visible yet distant, power restrained by choice. He stopped before her, close enough that she could see frost clinging to his lashes. His voice, when he spoke, did not rise. He named her again, then named winter itself, calling it a season that stripped truth bare. He spoke of law and lineage, but also of trust freely given, of hands that chose kindness without promise of return. The villagers listened, breath shallow, understanding that this was no ordinary judgment. He turned to her then and asked a single question, quiet enough to feel private despite the crowd. Would she stand as she had before, when snow and blood shared the ground, or would she surrender the path she had opened? The choice was hers, he said, and the pack would honor it. Her heart struck hard once, then steadied. She remembered the pup's eyes, the weight of a life held briefly in her arms, and answered without flourish. She would stand. Not for reward, not for protection, but because mercy, once chosen, did not retreat. A murmur rolled through the square, fear colliding with awe. The Alpha King inclined his head, accepting her answer as covenant. He spoke then of union, not as possession but as alliance, binding courage to crown, compassion to command. Gasps broke free, some sharp with outrage, others trembling with hope. The elders stiffened, realizing how completely the ground had shifted beneath them. The girl felt the magnitude of what was offered press against her ribs, terrifying and luminous. She did not look away. Winter answered the moment with wind, a sudden rush that lifted snow into spirals around them. The king removed his cloak and wrapped it fully around her shoulders, not as shelter but as declaration. He placed his hand over the chain at her throat, sealing the vow before witness and season alike. The pack advanced one step, unified, heads lowered in acknowledgement. Power bent, not to dominate, but to recognize worth forged outside privilege and fear. The villagers fell silent. No voice rose in challenge. Even resentment paused, uncertain how to shape itself against what had been claimed so openly. The girl's knees weakened, but she remained upright, drawing strength from the steady presence beside her. She felt the weight of future eyes, future trials, and accepted them. This was not rescue, it was ascent earned through endurance. Snow softened its fall, as if winter itself approved restraint giving way to resolve. When the Alpha King spoke again, his words were not proclamation but promise. He would walk beside her into what followed, not shielding her from every wound, but ensuring none were inflicted in darkness. The honesty of it settled deeply, more intimate than vows dressed in grandeur. She answered with a nod, trusting her voice might fail her. The crowd exhaled as one, sensing the ending of something old and the birth of something untested and formidable. As the pack turned back toward the forest, the king offered her his arm. She took it, feeling the world recalibrate around that simple contact. Together they stepped forward, leaving the square behind. Snow closed over their footprints almost at once, but the impression remained, pressed into memory rather than ground. Winter watched them go, silent now, its price paid not in blood, but in courage named aloud and claimed at last.